respond to it. And so Eric is going to speak to us about fire resilience in the defensible space and beyond. And he is with the land, he's a land management planner with the Sonoma Ecology Center. And Eric will discuss creating resilient landscapes both near the homes and in the wildland urban interface, including sustainability, basic fire behavior, native plant placement, and selection in the defensible space, and how to approach transitioning beyond defensible space. Eric Schoohs is a leader in the North Bay stewardship community. He is passionate about empowering people to build a relationship with the land and works in many different roles to further this personal mission. So please welcome Eric.
Wow, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Kristen. Yes, so I've been at this for quite a while and been really enjoying moving kind of from the implementation side. I still do a lot of implementation, but really to engaging with other folks and building community around caring for the land because it is so valuable and important. So really happy to have all this buy-in. Love groups like the CNPS chapters. We have ours here in Sonoma, down in Marin. I used to work for Marin County Parks, so I feel pretty connected to the land there as well, and really the whole North Bay. And as much as the way we have to operate sometimes is based on boundaries formed through, the government or other things, as land managers and community members, the way that we can operate is definitely with fewer boundaries, based on ecosystem types and other things. So I think there's so much information to be shared here. So today, kind of the format, I'll go through the slides and I love to kind of dive into random little topics. I'll give you anecdotes. I'll give you kind of deep dives on small points. But really, if there's something that stands out to you and you say, "Oh, I would love to know a little bit more about this," or this is really poignant for me in my house, and I have a specific. We kind of love little case studies. I think it's much more valuable for all of you to have this interactive space. So please put those in the chat. At the end, we'll have like an open Q&A session, and we'll see how much time and how many questions we can get to. But please, there's no such thing as a dumb question. It's all about engaging, and I'm just super jazzed to chat about it. So. With that, without further ado, I think we've got the masses here with 66 folks, so I'm gonna begin. All right, so I called it defensible space assessment presentation, but it's just the defensible space and moving beyond. I do work for Sonoma Ecology Center, and I also have my own business doing landscaping beyond defensible space and home hardening. And again, just here for the health of the land ultimately. So whatever way I can kind of dive into that, whether that's teaching at the JC or giving little chats like this, super jazzed about it. So I have a couple different resources I'll talk about today. Number one is the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, the Resilient Landscapes Coalition themselves. So that's Sonoma Ecology Center, and a few other groups, including the Sonoma chapter of the CNPS, the UC Master Gardeners, and the final is I'm having a brain fart right now. So, anyways, one more group, and Fire Safe Sonoma. Thank you. So it talks a little bit about all of the above here. You can see, please check out the website, resilientlandscapescoalition.org. I'll talk about a little bit later, was linked in the initial email, and that's Tending the Land. And that talks a lot more about beyond defensible space. And we'll do a little bit of exploring of that resource at the end here. This actual presentation is pretty much based entirely on the content that you can find at this website, the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. So, feel free to explore a little bit more later as well. So first and foremost, we're talking about fire-wise or fire-resilient landscaping. We want to save lives. We want people to be protected. But the whole point of this too is that we don't have to just have that. We can also have biodiversity, fire resilience. We can hold water in place. And we don't have to have these like moonscape type situations, which I think, especially the people in this room, are very avoidant of. And thank you for that. So Yeah, we want to be careful about our selection. Here you can see actually a pretty healthy underscape. I think people might see the leaves and detritus at the bottom and be a little worried. As long as you're not in zone zero, that's actually great mulch. Naturally, oak trees and others. I think this is probably a California live oak in the background, Quercus agrifolia, and then you have some heuchera in here, and what looks like in the very front there, the beginnings of a small hazelnut. So you have kind of this biodiversity. When you have herbaceous ground cover, you have a lot less fire risk because they're not woody, they're not liable to create a lot of heat. So this is actually a really great example of a fire-wise and beautiful landscape, in my opinion. The other thing too is in the background having that little rock wall. That's a really nice way to have discontinuity of fuels, but offer a little bit of different beauty rather than just doing pathways or other. Great. Cool. Okay, so yeah, just to reiterate, we'll talk about defensible space, the ecology, sustainability piece. This is obviously a gigantic topic. I'll kind of breeze through it, but again, if there's more specific questions at the end, please bring them up. This is really my favorite part, so happy to chat about it infinitely. Design and maintenance principles, just yes, plant selection, things like that, which we'll kind of cover with the planting and maintenance as well, but also how are you planting? What does it look like, and how do we kind of create that beauty while keeping it fire safe? And finally, we're going to do a little exploration of the Tending the Land site. Some myths and questions, avoiding moonscapes, as I said, but we also don't want overgrown gardens because we've all seen those, and it's kind of like, ooh, neighbor, please do a little bit of maintenance here. Um, Cutting down trees, I think people tend towards clearing out a lot of trees, especially if they're close to the home. We can talk a little bit about that. And fire resistant plants, not necessarily a word that I like to use, but that's why it's in here to make us think about that phrasing. If plants are fire resistant, which are, and is it even really possible? So great. The principles, where we start. So it's always, I can't stress this enough, as much as we love plants and we love caring for the land. One of the best things we can do is start at the house, harden the home. If your home burns, think about all the carbon that goes into not only the components that are already there, but if you're building again, you got to ship all the new components, all the wood back in, and there's a carbon tax on that too. So we're thinking about the environment and caring for it, doing our best to at least do basics on protecting our home is a big deal. So implementing the 0 to 5 space, which they just came out with regulations really recently, and they're going to actually be enforceable on that. They've kind of been talking about making it regulation for several years now, but pretty quickly they're going to actually implement that, and it'll be 3 years that people will have to go from whatever they have now to actually a fully implemented 0 to 5, and they're going to start enforcing. So just want to let you all know that. We'll talk about creating islands of plants. So we have these little bunches, and then we have discontinuity so that you don't have fire just creeping across the ground. And there's still really beautiful little habitat spots. You might see some California quail in there or other little birds, other little mammals like living their life and enjoying themselves. Maintenance, you all probably know pretty well. A healthy plant is a well-maintained plant often. So when we're designing, we want to think about that in advance, how big they're going to be, what we have to do to take care of them, and if we have the capacity to implement that. And then we'll talk about we'll talk about maintaining and hydrating the plants. And finally, all of this information that I'm offering you is informed by science. It's vetted by the local fire folks from the whole North Bay region. So we just want to make sure we have up-to-date information that is helpful and impactful for everyone that's here. So we're going to start with the sustainability piece. Just a few, like there's infinite really ecosystem services offered by the land that we live on and the parts of it. Over here on the left, we have, a couple insects, but there's so much more to it. So biodiversity is a big part. We have resilient landscapes when we have a lot of different entities that are helping retain water on site, pollinate, food items, all up the trophic levels, you name it. Also a lot of beauty with that. So shade, can't say enough. What was it today? 74, 75. It got pretty darn hot. Having a little bit of shade is phenomenal. And so big fan of keeping trees on site in a lot of the places, and especially where we can. Soil. If we have healthy soil, we also are holding a lot of carbon in that soil. So if we're thinking about climate change or other ththings, a good proportion of that carbon is held in healthy soils, especially when you have things like native grasses that can have roots that are up to 20 feet long, 20 feet deep, holding it in place. Cleaning and managing the stormwater, that's a big part of also holding the soil in place, and you have cleaner water. And when you have plants that are kind of filtering, that's a great extra aspect that they're offering. The carbon sequestration I've already brought up a ton of times, and again, above and below ground with the biodiversity. So all of this stuff plays into itself. We're thinking about fire resilience, we're thinking about safety, but the ecosystem services, being able to breathe fresh air, being able to drink fresh water, having plants that are not dying late in the season because there's actually water on site, all of this kind of comes with creating these healthy landscapes. And more than ever before, a lot of people live in the wilderness urban interface, which I'll talk about a little bit, but we are at the forefront. This is the space that matters to make impacts for nature. A lot of times we separate ourselves, but we are a part of nature, not apart from it. And I think it's really valuable to note that, even if it seems pretty obvious. So again, biodiversity above and below ground. A lot of insects, of course, are kind of declining at a fast rate, but also things like fungi, different plants as climates kind of shift. A lot of us are wondering, well, what should I plant? I think it's just really important to note that things are on the decline. We'll shift it towards a more positive lens after this, but always keeping that in mind. And a lot of the things we don't see. We might feel it as we're seeing plants we used to love not really surviving as well, or maybe not as many insects as we once did. So yeah, wonderful. So how can we support biodiversity? Um, as we've talked about, and this is obviously poignant for you all, native plants. I I would love to say 100% native plants, but because there's also other values at play, we usually say 70, 80%. You could have plants that your mom planted or someone that you really care about brought in, and so they can have beauty. And again, it was kind of brought up earlier, but any plant can be great in a fire resilient landscape as long as it's maintained. So some people kind of point at certain plants and say, hey, this is the problem, but it's not necessarily so. Native plants do offer more forage for native species and insects, but you will see natives that can kind of grab food from non-native species as well. Why isn't this working? Okay. Um, Planting in islands. So depending on what zone you're in, if you're in zone 1, which is 5 feet to 30 feet, we recommend a little bit smaller, maybe 3 feet by 10 feet at maximum. But if you're moving out into zone 2, 30 to 100 feet, you can go even bigger. Um, Much like the opposite of fragmentation of the environment. If you have a larger area, you might have opportunity for more for more animals, especially larger animals to live in there. You might have mammals or more birds able to live, maybe a deer or two if you like them. Um, Using integrated pest management. It's kind of a complex term, but we're thinking about removing invasives. We're thinking about using all the tools in our toolbox and leaving space for the natives and providing water sources. Definitely really helpful for the animals, but also keeping plants hydrated, especially near the home, is one of the best ways to keep your home fire resilient. Okay, so building soil, sequestering carbon. There's this really complex picture on the right. All that is to say is, as much as there's a lot of carbon on top, we think of trees, there's also the whole root system underneath. So, it's kind of split down the middle, almost 50% on each side. When we're storing it in the ground, it's not accessible to go back up into the air. So that's really an amazing space to keep our carbon. And part of the issue that we're seeing nowadays as ice caps are melting is a lot of that carbon that was held just under the soil or just under the ice is now escaping and kind of extrapolating the issue. So in 1 year, a mature tree absorbs more than 48 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and of course gives us that beautiful oxygen to breathe. So again, our built landscapes make a huge difference, and we need to really feel that and do our best to maintain them. Oak trees, great natives. They really play well with the local flora and fauna. So I actually read a study pretty recently that said California live oaks actually host up to 700 different insect species. So just for an example. Um, they do a really good job of shading out the area. They drop their leaves and retain moisture with their kind of natural mulch, keeping carbon there as well, and a great habitat for a lot of our decomposers. And as it says there, organic mulch, which is not too different from all the leaves that fall. So building that soil. Let's dive into how homes burn. So this is a great acronym that I really love. Red. I should have made the letters here in the color red. But the three ways that a home can burn are radiant heat, which is just contact. It's literally, if you think about the sun, the way that the sun warms us is radiation or radiant heat. And then you have embers, which 60 up to there's a lot of studies out, but between 60 and 90% of homes that actually burn are started by embers. So hardening the home is a really great way to minimize the chance of your home burning, especially if you have a defensible space that's set up well. Then you have far less chance of the third one, direct flame contact. If you don't have vegetation right next to your house, you also are kind of at the same time mitigating radiant heat from getting hot enough to burn through your windows or other things. So embers are really what we're defending for, especially with home hardening. And then everything else is the defensible space. So again, I've already said this, can't iterate it enough. Start at the home, work out. Here on the right, you can see the zones. A lot of them have different names. I just usually say zone 0, 1, and 2. Zone 0 is that 0 to 5. No combustibles at all. We're looking for rock, like rock mulches, things like that. Actually, really highly recommend you can do like a 3/8 minus, like a crushed rock base, and then you can add some sort of beautiful rock on top. Is a nice way to mitigate costs for doing that zone. And there are other options too. We'll talk about a little bit in the design. Some of the names are the Ember Defense Zone, and then Zone 1, Lean, Clean, and Green. And those kind of help you think about what you're doing in those spaces. And finally, the Reduced Fuel Zone. You have a little bit more play in Zone 2 because you're getting a little bit further away. Last point on this slide, a lot of us don't have 100 feet on any given side that is just our home. So it is all about working with neighbors, especially where the zones kind of coincide with someone else's. A lot of zone 2s bleed into, or zone 1 or 2s bleed into other people's zone 1 and 2. And there's a lot of opportunities. I know people have probably had a lot of nightmares trying to work with neighbors. If people have questions about that, I'm happy to chat. I think one of the biggest things is doing the work ourselves can often be a motivator. You show what the beauty can be of a well-maintained landscape. That's also everything else we're offering here. And and hopefully that's a little motivator and it can start a conversation. So design 0. We're minimizing, I would say, eliminating plants, especially with this new regulation coming out, any flammable materials. One of the most common things I see is people leaning things on their house, like a tool, a broom, whatever it is. That is like number one easiest thing to change that can make a big difference. I've seen a lot of pictures of like brooms that were leaning on a house actually starting the house on fire. So it's starting with simple things, moving flammable things like wood piles away from the house, propane tanks, giving it space. A lot of times historically, I think we've stored those in zone 0, but we're really trying to push not to do that. Inorganic, non-combustible mulches, hardscaping, walkways, just so that you have some function in the space instead of just a 5-foot empty zone is really nice. And with wood fences, you can still keep your wood fence. You just need to have discontinuity. So, 3 or 5 feet of metal fencing. And there's been a lot of studies to show that those basically, if you don't have the metal fence, will act as a fuse. The fire starts down the fence and it burns all the way to the home. So a couple easy things, or a couple simple things, not necessarily easy, but simple things that can make a huge difference when it comes to protecting your home. And maintenance. if we have a lot of trees and other plants, it's just all that debris and clutter, especially in our uh when if it's not necessarily home hardening, it's close by, but if you're thinking about gutters, gutters are literally just a little bed of flammable material that is waiting to catch on fire. So removing from them, removing from the ground near the house. Any plants around here are maintained meticulously. You keep them moist, and make sure the plant debris is removed from them. And finally, I actually am a huge proponent of trees in zone zero. They have to be of a certain size. You want to limb them up. Actually heard six. Maybe it seems pedantic, but 6 feet from chimney, or sorry, 6 feet above the roof, I should say, and then 10 feet from chimneys. So, and less likely to start on fire. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures from like the Paradise Fire, or different spaces like this. A lot of times when you have close packed homes, the homes will ignite each other, but the trees actually survive. So it is good. You got to keep them maintained, but I think they're pretty unlikely to actually burn compared to the structures if they're not hardened. Great. So here's just a few examples, different things that you can do in the zone zero. So here we have, actually on the left, you could put in the chat if you want. There's one thing wrong with this picture, and I kind of like to use it so that it's an example. Generally, it looks pretty good. On the left, we can see there's some islands, low-lying plants. A little bit further out in zone one, you've got this specimen plant that's pretty large but well maintained. So a lot of beauty there, but something missing, something not done perfectly. Um, Moving to the middle, you kind of have this well hydrated. I forget the exact plant name here, to be honest, but you have these well hydrated succulent leaf plants basically that are ground cover mixed in with pavers. That's a really nice aesthetic, and at the same time is giving you that strong zone zero. And then on the right, you do have some plants. It's not maybe 5 whole feet, but you've got 3 feet, and then you have plants like looks like heuchera, and maybe a red flowering currant, which are beautiful plants and not overly dense, not overly thick with material. So again, lower risk. Moving out to zone one, again, 5 feet to 30 feet, clean, and green zone. This is where you start to have your islands. So you're separating them by pathways. You can use things like pavers. You can use things like walls, retaining walls, as you see in this lower photo. It's all about keeping plants hydrated. Generally, lower lying plants are better. Fewer woody species, not as bad, or like not a bad idea either. And generally, these are great habitat zones. This is also where if you are where they're going to be. So keeping it accessible and open is really valuable. Here we're going to rely mostly on small shrubs, perennials, up to 3 feet. Again, keeping them pretty short. But again, you might have those specimen species, those manzanitas you really love, or maybe there's um, a, a Japanese maple, whatever it may be. Just making sure it's well maintained, keeping horizontal and vertical spacing. We're always thinking about both so we don't create continuity on the ground so the fire can creep, and we don't create ladder fuels so that the fire can move upward. And one great example, there's quite a few native perennial grasses now that you can use as lawn species. And this down here in the bottom picture is called Carex praegracilis. And in the top, these are actually the top and bottom of this lower picture are both the same grass. It's just the bottom is obviously mowed and the top is left as is. So, it can still be a space that can offer nice habitat and things, or you could have a space that you can walk around on and move. And a lot of these native plants will dry out later in the year, but unlike our other, Kentucky bluegrass, things like that, they use far less water. And when they dry out, they're used to that. So they'll come back next year when you start watering them rather than having to replace lawn all the time or reseed. So it's a great option. Here are a few examples. You can use mulch if you would like. 2, maybe 3 inches, great, especially arbor mulch when it has all parts of the tree. This tends to decay and offer more nutrients back to the soil. It holds moisture better. Um, in juxtaposition to gorilla hair mulch, which is an ember bed, it's liable to start on fire, um, and doesn't necessarily decay super easily. Same with other mulches that I wouldn't recommend personally are dyed mulch in general. They don't tend to absorb and hold the water the same way. They don't decay and offer nutrients to the soil. They do last a long time, so the aesthetic sticks, but you're missing out on all the other beautiful aspects of what mulch can offer. And the last one is, of course, like rubber mulches. We say no to that. And any bark mulch, just purely bark mulch, is similar to dyed mulches. It doesn't hold water. It doesn't break down as easily. So we wouldn't recommend those. Trees are fine. Keep them well pruned. And fences are fine, but they could present a risk. And we should just make sure we have some spacing between them so they're not starting fire. Again, as long as they're in zone one, they can be all wood, but as soon as you move closer to the house, you want to have that space. Here on the left, you can see a nice little walking way, a nice little walkway and path, some native grasses there. And you can use non-natives down here. We see some lavender, but you could also replace that with some natives, which I think we have a slide later that I can recommend an exchange there, probably like a salvia or something. And then on the right, you have Sonoma sage. You've got all these nice native plants just above the stone fence with a nice little walking path, so you're close to them. They're a little bit elevated. Use of stones is really beautiful here, and I like the wooden treads in there as well. So a lot of options. And then in the background too, you can see we have some more trees a little bit further off. Other examples, water features. You could have a little rain garden. You could have rocks, and this is a nice little discontinuity to have like a pond, something thereabouts. It doesn't have to be seasonal. It doesn't have to be permanent. It could be seasonal or ephemeral. On the right here, it's a little bit hard to see, but they have a nice patio, little gap, and then a step down with the stone pathways and natives intermixed there. All great options, and that's a nicely hardened home with the metal roof and everything. Great. So the zone two, which is where we start thinking about transitioning, we're a little less strict. We have a little bit more of leeway, and then it transitions into the beyond defensible space. So we are still maintaining our vertical and horizontal spacing. We can use larger plants. I highly recommend groups. A lot of plants really thrive, especially trees, when they're in groups of three, two, three, four, something like that. Um, I don't know if any of you have read The Secret Life of Trees, but they've recently found out through use of carbon 14 and other science that basically trees are communicating with each other and sharing uh, nutrients, water, other things like this. So it's my conjecture that many plants are probably doing that same thing through their mycorrhizal system, and it's nice to give them friends. Uh, Here, pathways 4 to 5 feet wide. Great. You want to have a little bit of a break. Arbor mulch, leaf litter, keep it to a moderate amount. Sometimes it can get really deep, so it is good to clear that out once in a while, but we don't have to be overly particular. Doesn't need to be mow and blowed completely. So, ladder fuels, which we didn't really talk about with trees, just making sure we don't have a shrub that's very flammable right under a tree that's liable to burn. And oftentimes we want to keep 3 times the height between the top of that shrub and the bottom of the branches, 3 times the height of that shrub. Wood piles, some of you might still have wood burning stoves. I'm not sure. A lot of times here in California, it's not acceptable in regards to the IBHS, but it can zone. Great. Some examples. You have these nice little bundles. They're a little bit denser than we saw in zone one, and of course, zone zero. Looks like maybe some sage and maybe coffee berry, another one of my favorite natives. But you have this nice mix of different vertical heights as well, which I'm a big fan of. You can kind of group different heights, and it's aesthetically pleasing. and offers different habitat. And then on the right, you do have more of these mounds and this spacing next to the driveway. Um, you have native grasses, not offering a ton of fuel, but holding in carbon, habitat, etc. Um, yeah, and the trees in the background. One moment here. So here are some examples of the mulch, what to use between the zones. Um, Arbor mulch is fine between the islands. I'm actually a huge fan of using native grasses with a little bit of a gap. Maybe I guess you could use mulch or other things, but native grasses, I should say inherently arbor mulch is breaking down, so it's releasing carbon. A native grass is doing the opposite. It's a carbon sink. It's pulling in carbon. It's perennial, so its roots are really deep, and generally, it has less growth on the top on the ground. So, not too bad to maintain generally, and kind of preserving the environment. And you can always do gravel or stones as well. As I was talking about in rain gardens, also bioswales. They're basically synonymous terms, but bioswales tend to be larger for taking in the rainwater and helping sink it into the landscape, which can always use a little recharge on the aquifers. So, vegetation management that's what we're talking about, but I think a lot of times when people hear this, they're thinking only beyond defensible space, but vegetation management is happening right here in the defensible space. And because, as we talked about, we're trying to create a resilient landscape that's offering biodiversity and all the above that we've already referenced. Timing is everything. Some of you might know, but bird nesting season tends to be start around February, at least for by March and end around August. But some species, depending on where you are, especially if you're liable to be by northern spotted owls, for instance, one of our favorite little their nesting can start as early as late January or February. They tend to be around redwoods and older growth Doug firs, but might be worth looking into if you think you're living by them. And they can go a little, I usually push it a little bit beyond August just to be safe. And that's not to say you can't do work, but if you're going to be doing work, either one, I would say, request a bird survey, find someone that knows how to do that, or walk around on your land a little bit and do it yourself. We have a page on tending the land that I'll show you about how to do nesting bird surveys. I worked with Marin County Parks to get their training materials. So it's official. It's how they do their trainings and how they approach it. And I just think it's a really interesting and fun skill, and it's also very valuable to it's really easy to just say, oh, well, I'm just going to do this vegetation management and not think about it. But that's one small way to help protect our little friends out there. And as it says here, remember that we share this space. Great. So maintenance in zones 1 and 2, it's all about removing kind of the clutter and the debris. Plants don't stop growing, as we all well know. They can pretty quickly get kind of messy. We've all seen the people who haven't necessarily been around and things have kind of been let go. It can happen pretty quickly, but if we stay on top of it, it's a lot less work. Here on the left, well, I'll jump onto the pictures in a second. Keeping organic mulch 8 to 12 inches from tree trunks. That's a big one that I see a ton of where people really fill in the mulch, and that a lot of microorganisms and things that can infect an oak and kind of be a transmission of disease right into the trunk. So give it a little bit of space. If there is mulch there, let it be the leaf mulch that's natural. Same thing with wood fences because we don't want them to burn. Also, when you have the mulch and you have the organics, like more likely for the wood fences to break down. Remove the dead and dry plant material, especially in the middle. A lot of times people will cut on the outside and not realize like in the middle is the most flammable space, especially if you're talking about junipers and all these kind of plants that have been around for a while, that were planted in the 60s and 70s and they've been kind of maintained. A lot of times they have an inner skeleton that is just a fuel bed. So really helpful to take a deeper look. Maintaining the spacing, I've already talked about that. You have the 3x rule. Whatever the height of your shrub is, above that, you don't want anything for 3 times that. So if you have a 2-foot shrub, you want 6 feet of spacing between that and a tree that might be above it. Horizontal spacing, as we said, in zone 1 and 2, generally 4 to 5 foot paths. And zone zero, of course, is basically just 5 feet of non-combustibles. Keep everything hydrated. That's huge. And one point I really want to make with this is people think about hydrating when a fire's coming, but it's really all about hydrating continually. If you just start hydrating a few days before a fire comes, most of our native plants take in water over time, or any plants really take in water over time, and you can't just drown it and expect that the fuel moisture of that plant is going to increase rapidly. We really got to keep up on this and make sure that our watering systems are in place and functioning well. Um, Thinning rather than hedging, removing more of the branches, especially the secondary branches. I'll show you some examples here. And on the left here, as I was talking about, you see probably like a sage or something. Sorry, these pictures aren't the most clear for me on my screen. You see a plant that has kind of died back. They cut it out completely. They coppiced it. And then the next fall, yeah, it looks like sage. The next year, the following summer, thriving again. And honestly, in my opinion, it looks more beautiful. So you have less of the flammable material, and you also have a beautiful plant. Here's an example of that. Just a quick one hit. Here's your tree. It says tree, could be a shrub. Either way, look into what species. A lot of you might know here with the CMPS, but there's a lot of websites. You could go to the CMPS website, or you could go to uh, Cal Naturalist, I think it is, to learn more about that. Cut it close to the base. The shoots come back out, and then you have all these fresh shoots that are beautiful. The leaves are healthy, larger flowers, etc. And here for trees, it says between 7 and 20 years. If it's a shrub, the next year. Okay, so we talked about hedging and thinning. Hedging can get pretty ugly pretty quickly, especially with a lot. You see it with like hedgerows, things like that. A lot of shrubs, junipers, etc. It creates really this dense, kind of half-dead plant. You get these blocky things that are also highly likely to burn. So rather than that, we recommend thinning. So you can do it yourself if you're feeling gung-ho. I really like this picture on the bottom right. You're cutting a lot of the secondary stems. So first you're cutting all the dead material, then you're cutting at the base and limbing just to give it a little bit of horizontal space at least. Or sorry, a little bit of vertical space at least, I should say. And then you're going through and selecting which branches you like. And when we're talking defensible space, a lot of times you want more verticality rather than the horizontal growth. So choosing the more erect stems is kind of a nice way to go about it. One moment here. All right. As I've been talking about spacing, so horizontal spacing, when we're talking on flatland, I'm sure a lot of you live in sloped areas. Chris and I were talking before this, and you got some steep areas you got to think about a little bit greater spacing. It sounds like she's probably dealing with that. So for the horizontal, it's only two times, uh, especially with shrubs, it's only two times the distance, the height of the shrub. As you move up 20 to 40%, and you can get like a clinometer, it's called, or, or you can walk up. Here's the rule I've been talking about. Ladders. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about that. Really, it's just saying, hey, if this thing starts on fire, the flame length on top tends to be at least two times the height of whatever that material is. For safety, we give it another time the actual height. So you can see in this image, if you have that spacing, it doesn't show the spacing when burning, but the heat wouldn't be enough to actually reach the lower branches of the tree. And if you've ever tried to light uh, a log, if you've been out had a campfire or anything like that, if you were to just use a lighter, might be sitting there a long time and not have any reaction. So if you're keeping things from lighting the smaller material high up in a tree and the heat just goes to the trunk, most of our trees are fire resilient, especially oaks, not likely to start on fire. It's a really important rule. It's I see oftentimes people have really well maintained landscapes and then they had a shrub they really loved and they didn't want to cut it. They left it in place and could really easily start their beloved tree on fire. So sometimes we do have to weigh this benefit cost analysis and remove things that we love, but maybe you can replant it or an opportunity to find a new love. So yeah, I think that. Oh, the one other thing is it's 3 times. If you're limbing up a tree, you're doing it 6 feet standard, or 3 times. Or if it's a small tree and you don't, I mean, you still want to follow the 3x rule, but it's a third of the tree height. Anything more than that, and it's liable to die. So just paying attention to that as well. Here's an example, some juniper growing into a tree. And what this person did, this was actually Ellie. She's one of the founding. Rather than remove all the juniper, she wanted to kind of keep it for now, at least to a certain degree. She has a lot of quail and other species, so she just gave it a nice little bit of horizontal spacing. She's got her 3x still above, but has that horizontal spacing, so it's still offering habitat. She didn't completely remove everything, and now she could maybe plant something else if she wanted to, like slowly remove the juniper completely. And oh, here on the bottom left is a great example of what I was talking about, where it's like, hey, on the outside it looks pretty green. As soon as you get into the middle, it's like highly flammable, a lot of dry, dead material hanging out in there. Fire resistant plants. Um, there is no such plant. All plants will burn. They're organic material. But rather than thinking about what is fire resistant, we can think about, and let me know it says my internet connection's unstable, so if you can't hear me, let me know. But it's all about choosing the right spaces for that, right? So we're not planting right next to the house, you can see on the top left here, or we're not planting right next to a structure, especially with this bamboo. We're putting it into the islands, we're keeping the vertical and horizontal spacing, and then of course maintain, maintain, maintain. So when we're creating our design in the first place, just think about what it will be, not what it is now. Um, that's really helpful, and especially for you all folks that are really into plants with the CMPS. I'm sure there are people who aren't with the CMPS. You can talk to your friends though. It's a great opportunity to think about what something will look like, and I think that there's an excitement and exhilaration about hope for the future, being excited about what something is going to grow into. Um, Thinking about it thriving and where these plants do best. Is it shady? Is it sunny? Uh, is it native or does it need does it need a lot of water? And then the maintenance. So certain species certainly everything will burn, but some need more maintenance. Some have more volatile oils. So it's really important to think about that. And finally, natives versus non-natives are fine, but then there's also the other side that's invasive. We really want to avoid, we all know pretty well, Scotch broom, which actually a lot of brooms that we see are French broom, but I won't go into that too deep. Um, but I've still seen that up until pretty recently in different nurseries. So um, if you're buying from a place that isn't a native nursery, or even if it is a native nursery, maybe be checking in and making sure you're not putting something that we now know is really detrimental, such as broom or ivy, other things like this. Great. Great. Here's a really beautiful man's. It's been limbed up at the bottom. It has a little bit of spacing. It doesn't have to be 6 feet on something like this, but it has a lot of spacing intermittently in the middle too. So the secondary branches have been thinned rather than trying to shape it by hedging. And I love this. Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite specimen species to see at someone's house. I will say, don't look in the background too much. They've got some pretty bad ladder fuels with their tree and some other things to do, but at least in this zone 2 specimen shrub, they're getting after it. Um, yeah, some great lawn substitutes just because we want to talk plants. Big fan of yarrow. Low growing, beautiful. It can fill in pretty well, and it's a great food source. Monkey flower. Diplochus orienticus is a beautiful one. There's also a lot of cultivars that function pretty similarly in the environment with that. I love those orange flowers. Buckwheat or Eriogonums, a whole bunch of different species and cultivars as well, but just the standard Eriogonum nudum, which is like California buckwheat, is to me really beautiful. But if you want something a little more showy, go to your local native plants or native plant nursery. I would say CMPS sounds like you just had your big plant sale. Maybe there's some scraps to pick at still, but look around for those. And finally, asters. Who doesn't love them? This one we already showed, so I'm gonna skip it. Finally, thank you for listening. I don't know exactly what time it is, but I know we've been at it for a while. Um, I'm going to show you the Tending the Land website, and we're going to move beyond defensible space. Um, and then we will dive into the Q&A. So let me share my other section quick. Great. So tendingland.org, you come into the entry. We have this set up so that everything is on the left hand here for those who speak Spanish or other languages, or if you want another language, we use just Google Translate. You can come and check it out in different languages. The entry page will tell you all about what it is, but the biggest idea is much akin to defensible space. We're talking about the iterative nature. So we're gonna plan, we're gonna learn, we're gonna go out and be like, well, what could I possibly do? We're gonna plan, okay, this is what I want to do, and then we're gonna try it. And inevitably, when we try it, we figure out some things don't work as well as we want. So we go back to the drawing board. But every little circle that we go through gives us a little more knowledge and gives us more opportunity for growth. And of course, this is for stewards of all kinds. You don't have to own a house. You could just be a volunteer or just care. Maybe you work out in open spaces or volunteer with parks, things like that. A lot of information here. So I'll be pretty quick because I want to get to the Q&A and I realize I've been long-winded, but in the learn section, there's some great opportunities to learn about the ecological principles around land. We touched on some of those today. We'll see if it loads for me right now. Just like big concepts about how these things function, how we need disturbance, but we don't want too much of it, or else we have degenerated forests, and if we have too little, then we have overstocked forests. So it's this middle ground, and you can kind of go into that. One of my favorite things is we worked with some local people on indigenous land gardening to get information. This is Redbird Willie, who's a local practitioner. He's great. Greg Saris, local author from Great Rancheria, put some of his book in here, and we worked with him, and it was fantastic. So if you get a chance, please read that. I think Kristen was saying she was before this and thoroughly enjoyed it. And then Clint McKay, who works at Pepperwood here up north, they've been doing some fantastic work as well. You can learn a little bit more about that. Learn more about the different vegetation communities. We have land inventory template for, if you're trying to figure out what species you have, you can keep track of them there. And a couple of different case studies of what's been done at places like Saddle Mountain. These are up north, of course, but Saddle Mountain Open Space Preserve, Pepperwood, and thinking about Douglas fir encroachment. In the planning, just helps you think through everything we've talked about. There's some pages on funding, which do translate into Marin. So if you're trying to figure out how to fund any work, especially beyond, you can look there. Some ideas about permitting and about what it costs per acre under the cost for land stewardship. And my favorite part of the whole site is not just talking about the work, but physically how to do the work. So some of my favorite pages are beneficial fire. You can learn about doing burn piles, how to do them well. There's also a biochar page in here that you can go more in depth, burn pile guide, and how to kind of prep if you want to do prescribed fire if you have enough land. And we work closely with Fire Forward to make that happen, that this page happen. So super jazzed about that. Habitat features, things you can retain. Another one I really love, talking about snags, talking about legacy trees, patches, shrubs, piles, all the things that actually create that biodiversity. A few other ones. Again, I'm going to go short, but the last one I'll recommend here or reference is nesting bird surveys. Again, we worked with Marin County Parks. How to go about them. You start at 7 in the morning. You have to do them before 11, onward and so forth. One of my favorite birds here, northern flicker. And there's a lot of other ones about thinning, forest management. It's broken down by the different plant communities, grasslands, woodlands, and others. So Great. And with this was funded by the Vegetation Management Grant Program here in Sonoma County, and we were really grateful for them kind of putting in the effort to make it happen. So all the resources, I see we have a lot of things in the chat. I don't know how many of them are questions, but I guess I'll kind of open it up. Did you have any specific questions right off the bat, Kristen?
I don't, but anyone can unmute, maybe raise their hand if they have a question or just speak out. Otherwise, I think we'll scroll down the chat and see what we have. Thank you.
Oh
Thank you
yeah, I've
very
got one.
much. This is
So
a great program. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I love please dive in with the specific questions. It's a lot of information to try and cover, but I love sharing it. So, Carol asked if native grasses dry out in the summer, doesn't that make them more flammable? Um, yes, it can, but if you cut them short, so a lot of their biomass is underground, you can cut them really short. So there's really not flammable material there. Um, and then they'll still grow back next year. So I would do like an inch or less. And then I wouldn't be so worried about. I would still have some discontinuity between them and the house, but I wouldn't be worried about them carrying fire in the same way.
And Craig Draymond just has some comments and a link to his work down the peninsula. Andrew Hall asks if we already have wooden fences that attach to our houses. Is there anything they can do to make the fences less flammable? And you mentioned
Yeah.
breaking up
So
fencing with metal sections, which is
totally, yeah. So next to the house, of course, still recommend like don't yes, we don't want to remove our, especially like our beautiful redwood fences, but making that gap is a huge, makes a huge difference. Next to the fence, if you don't want to change things beyond that, just removing material, treating it like defense, like the zone zero almost. So just give it, it doesn't have to be 5 feet, but remove down to bare mineral soil at least a foot out. So you don't, again, have that direct pathway of fire to the bottom of a fence. Um, yeah, Craig's comments here, definitely native plants. Thanks for sharing that YouTube video. I'm actually pretty curious about it. But a lot of native plants are fire adapted, so inherently they can kind of manage fire better, and they don't necessarily they create less of a risk generally than non-native plants to create high intensity fire. So there's fuel involved in them, like when you're looking at hayfield tar plant, purple needle grass, not a ton of material up top. So yeah, not carrying fire in the same way as monoculture broom.
or the annual
Okay.
Mediterranean grasses too. The annual Mediterranean grasses tend to be big carriers of fire. What do you recommend for steep slopes in order to prevent erosion?
Yeah, so you could try doing grasses. Something else I've seen is um, basically doing like terracing. It's not ideal, but if it's right near the home, you can kind of create that flat space and then have plants actually there and use a retaining wall of sorts, like using rock. It's not super easy, but it is a way to kind of hold the soil in place, especially once you get super duper steep. We've all seen like there's not too much to be done. I would recommend if you do that, like make sure you're using a professional that really cares about erosion. I've seen a lot of spaces where they don't know that much and they maybe kind of try, but yeah, it's not ideal. Otherwise, yeah, if you can't, if you can get whatever naturally vegetates there that's native to stay, that's great. But as we well know, that's not super easy. So it might be time for kind of an intervention and a retaining wall.
Jim
Um,
Casper has his hand
yeah,
up, so I'll just Jim, you can unmute and ask your question.
So, Eric, one of the the challenge with answering that question is how immediate you want to make the change. If you're trying to do it wholesale, I think the things you talked
yeah,
about are true. However, if somebody, a lot of this stuff is going to take time. In fact, they may be years.
mhm,
So what you could do is do a checkerboard kind of a change and install some low-growing ceanothus or other natives in a sort of checkerboard pattern where they give them a couple of years to grow and you do the next square, if you will, and you do it over time. So it doesn't have to be a quick change.
That is such a great point. Yeah, thanks for bringing us back to that to center on that, Jim. That should be a standard in everything is we can't do it all at once. It is really about long-term building that relationship. And I like that idea of kind of having a mosaic. That's definitely what we want long-term, but giving space. And if you can't, if you have bare soils in short term, you can't cover them. Mulch is a great option. I know sometimes it's so steep that it's hard to keep the mulch even, but doing kind of what we can as far as keeping live plant material there, bit by bit. Okay.
Katie Martin asks if we know anything about the pile burning at China Camp State Park. I do not. Maybe somebody else can chime in the
I
chat,
don't.
or you might.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do not. Marin County Parks, like most of the time when they're doing it, they're hiring out the actually 100% of the time when they do it. So if it's associated with such like the Open Space Preserve and Marin County Parks, then the fire folks are doing it. It would be Marin County Fire. So um, I don't know anything about it besides that they definitely have a lot of resources. So there's hopefully some safety there. Kay, did you have anything to add to that? You are muted though.
You need to unmute.
You can unmute yourself if you'd like, if you have relevant info.
Yes, they did do pile burning at China Camp State Park, and they made these big teepees of wood. And it seemed to me, in some cases, they were very close to the existing trees that they had left. And they have done some burning already. And that's why I was curious if where this idea came from to do it this way. And it sounds like there are professionals that
Yeah,
about this
there's
stuff.
so much that goes into pile burning, and I highly recommend check out our pile burning page on tending the land. But definitely in some of these spaces, it's so dense, it's hard to find any space that's not close to a tree. I do know they do put some intention. They are fire folks, so it's a little bit of a different lens a lot of times when I've worked with them at least. And I'm, no shade, they are thinking about getting the fuel off and making the land relatively more safe. But they do work in a lot of spaces with like the MWPA and other groups like this to try to find the beneficial lens of the best for both worlds, right? So biodiversity and health. So they might not be perfectly placed, but ideally when they do place them, they place them next to trees they think are either low or valuable if they don't have a choice but to place next to trees. They try to protect larger trees and next to higher limbs as well. So we'll see. The other thing I will say that I haven't seen on that sphere is like if you do a burn pile, yes, it can be useful if you're in like a degraded area to remove invasives. But if you're in a pretty healthy area, it also sanitizes the soil and can remove natives. So a really big thing for me is maintenance after a burn pile. If that's the approach that you're taking to removing fuels, make sure you're planting things, especially like grass plugs that are meant to live in that space. So if you're out in an open area like a grassland, you could put some stepopulchra into there, the following spring or whenever after before it hits summer, of course, and ideally you don't wait a full year before you plant, but sometimes that's the way it goes. We do what we can. Um, that's a great option. Also, if you are around a degraded area and you have the opportunity to move the material, move it onto some broom, move it onto some sort of invasive species that you don't want. So that is a tool that can be really helpful as well. And people oftentimes would say, well, why don't you chip? Um, Chipping is useful to a certain degree, but also we love our little ground covers, our herbs, our little herbaceous ground covers. And a lot of times chipping can like totally inundate those and kill them. So you have that. There's also the fact that like chipping breaks down the carbon. If you do a burn pile correctly, you can actually create biochar and kind of capture some of that carbon indefinitely in a stable carbon state. So you're also, when you're using a chipper, like inherently you're using diesel gas, so carbon there as well. So everything has this balance. There's a good page that talks about material, like removing materials from the land, but certainly, hopefully they're thinking about where they're placing their piles. Thank you, Kay. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And Paul Da Silva has a
Yeah.
little follow-up.
There was one more question in here. Do you irrigate all plants from
Oops, we lost.
especially at this time of the year? Can you hear me still? Sorry, my internet says
Yeah,
it's
you broke up a
okay.
little bit
Especially
there.
at this time in the year. I don't. Okay, so can you hear me now? So I'm answering Mary's question about irrigation. So at this point in the year, you can have your irrigation off. I think it's just later into the summer, we want to be conscientious that, again, you can't just water it all at once when it's fire season. You kind of got to prep the plant bit by bit. A lot of native plants, again, I think you can find this online, but a lot of native plants don't love like habitual little watering. They like soaking watering. So check out what your plants are really into. And again, with native plants, if you can, you do a soaking, like a drenching watering every few weeks, I think it is. And you'll tend to have more water retention and health in the plant that way. So, yes, I do recommend all plants at least in zone, especially zone 0, but like the beginning of zone 1 to give you that kind of breath from the house. But as many as you can do, depending on what the size of your yard is, I think is you're going to have less.
Oops, lost you again.
Okay, Craig added some more information. What was that?
There's a question about succulents which retain water in their leaves. Can those be planted in zone 0 or to help break up flammable groups of plants? And I would say yes, with the caveat that
So, yeah.
certain succulents can get large and woody themselves, like certain shrubby aloes, and so you just have to maintenance. It's all in maintenance. And but yes, I've actually heard of succulent plantings preventing houses from burning in fires in Southern California anyway. But we have relatively few. If you're looking at natives, we just have a few local succulents that are appropriate for gardens, Sedum spatulifolium, and that can be tricky to place and keep happy in a garden. It's not going to do the job you're asking of it. And then native Dudleyas, which tend to grow in pockets in rocks, and so not easy to place in different. They're not as readily grown as succulents from other parts of the world, I will say.
Well put, Kristen. Thank you. Jim here has his hand up again.
So I'm involved with Firewise as well as gardening. The Zone 0 regulations will go into effect for existing houses in the beginning of 2029.
Okay.
And depending on whether you look at the insurance requirements or what CAL FIRE will say, it could be nothing in Zone 0, including succulents. The most recent debate is allowing perhaps, and this is not definite, pots in plants, but low, and that's it. That should be finalized based on Governor Newsom's requirements by the end of this year. So I would say if you're planting something in Zone 0, don't do it.
Twice, definitely. No, thank you for the
Or
specific.
keep it portable.
Yeah, exactly. Got to be agile, especially with things shifting, and it definitely behooves us to plant with the natural system in line, regardless of regulation, I would say. So doing that interruption of fuel is generally really helpful. Okay.
A couple of hardscape questions. What kind of metal fences would you recommend? I abhor chain link fences.
Yeah, there's other ones. I've seen a lot of like black metal, and then you just have vertical slats basically. I don't have any specific recommendations to be honest, but I guarantee there's a fence specialist around and you could look online and find plenty of other options outside of of the classic chain link fence. Yeah, and if I what I can do is ask some friends in the sphere that are doing this and if so forward it to you all over at CMPS and see if we can get that information out.
And not a garden question either, but is there a way to fireproof a board and batten home?
I don't like the word fireproof.
No.
Not applicable.
Generally, there's no way to fireproof any home unless it was pure concrete. Um,
There are fire or ember resistant paints. I mean, I used some on some of my repainting recently.
yeah, there's some new ones out
Very
there,
twice as
Fire
expensive.
Coat,
Yeah.
which I think they're helpful, but the biggest thing is really reducing risk in areas where embers can land. So, if you have stucco, for instance, people say, well, stucco is not flammable. However, if you have direct flame contact, the wood behind it can start on fire. And the other thing is at the bottom, there's oftentimes a little weeping, like a metal weeping. There are some holes in this. And so the metal weeping is better than nothing, but you can also fill in that space. Otherwise, you have plywood right above it. And if that's close to the ground, you can fill in that space with different options. You could paint it with that fire resistant paint, as you're saying. Something that I've seen is like the rope on a stove, for instance. There's that black rope usually that keeps it tight if you have a wood stove. You can literally like glue that in underneath because then it's still breathable, but it's non-flammable. So there's a lot of different options. If you have a wood siding, people highly recommend flashing, like metal flashing at the bottom. Those are the main things. It's especially if you don't have a bunch of shrubs right up next to the house, it's pretty unlikely that just natural siding is going to burn. It's about places where heat coalesces and embers as well. So near the base of the house and then in the soffits near the top. And you can get like wildfire defense mesh in different places where you just want to go at least 1/8 inch or less with the mesh size so the embers can't get through. That's for under decks, near homes. If you have any like crawl spaces, things like that that are open, that makes a huge difference. Great. So, and the other thing is if you have little like holes and things near the ground, caulk it. Like you can go out and find any sort of caulking just so you don't have a space where those embers are going to catch and hold in place. There's more information on that. I think actually Marin County has a guide. Like I think it's like 14 pages for home hardening that you can look up online or we can find and share with you after this. Great. And I just want to say thank you to everyone as people are heading out. Thank you for the nice information. If anyone has more specific questions or wants to get in touch, you could do Eric at Sonoma Ecology Center.org or Eric at Ecos Land Services. I'll put it in the chat. Feel free to reach out. I love chatting about this stuff, and I'm here to help people. That's my ultimate goal is to protect the environment we live in and help make it healthier. So I'm so glad to be a part of all this.
Thank you so much, Eric. We will let you go because I know you're getting up at 5 in the morning. So, I'll stay on a little longer just to field a couple more questions in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me all.
Thank
really
you
appreciate
so
it.
much. It's a wonderful program.
Thank you.
It has been recorded, so if you missed some of it, you can pick it up on our YouTube channel later.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Eric.
Have a wonderful night, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then before I finish up with the chat, there are a couple of just one more announcement. Our May program is going to be on a seed collection program sponsored by the Pollinator Partnership. It's called Project Wingspan. There's a little notice about it in our latest e-bulletin. And so James Hart from that program will be speaking to us about that program and what we can do in Marin to help with it. And so one question in the chat here that I think I can answer, Yvonne asks if ivy beds near buildings are a fire hazard. They do actually build up dry leaves that are fairly slow to break down underneath. And in any case, certainly I would keep it at least 10 feet away from a wooden structure or any flammable structure if you can't get rid of it altogether. And then coyote brush is often on lists of plants not to retain or plant in your garden. I think the ground cover one, if it's well maintained, can certainly be very effective. It's intrinsically, yes, fairly flammable. So if you have the upright shrubby ones, keep them some distance away from flammable structures and maintain them by taking off dead branches as they mature. And then the ground cover ones, they can actually build up to a fairly woody depth. So you want to prune them young and fairly often, and they will resprout generally from moderate pruning. So that's what I have on that subject. And I think that pretty much covers the chat. Paul Da Silva had a follow-up about the China Camp Burn program, which apparently has a long history, initiated by former Chief Ranger Pat Robards with the help of advice from UC Berkeley Professor Harold Biswell decades ago. At that time, they burned the whole landscape of the islands. So thank you again, everyone. And a couple of people just joined at the last moment. So I'm sorry you missed the program, but it will be on our YouTube channel as a recording. So thank you again and hope you can join us in May. Good night, everyone.